recording. Welcome to a Tokenomics study group, now perhaps Tokenomics Guild. We got a promotion. It's one of those promotions that I think it comes with increased responsibility and a bigger title, but not necessarily additional compensation. But we're very excited. Our compensation is that we get to bring together wonderful Kernel Fellows and the occasional special guest every week to go a level deeper on a protocol or a token community that we think we could all learn something from. And we are evolving this format every week. We're sort of trying some new things. And this week, we're going to have the benefit of both a guest who is the author of a protocol that we're all very interested and excited about, and a Figma board, which gives us the opportunity to have a sort of a shared whiteboard space to ask questions, try to answer questions, visualize some of the complexity of a token system in a community, and we'll be using that throughout the conversation. I'm gonna hand it over to Renee, who suggested our topic for the week, and just have her tell us why Panvala. And many other people agreed with her that this is what we should be talking about this week. But it was Renee's initiative and also Renee's suggestion that we invite Niran. So I'm going to hand it to Renee, and then maybe we'll hear a little bit from Niran, and then we can just dive into this this very, very interesting token protocol community. Go ahead, Renee.
Oh, Niran, thank you so much for being here. I loved your fireside. I'm kind of new. I've lurked in Web3 for a while, but now that I'm in here, yours was one of the great and inspiring firesides that I've had an opportunity to talk to, because for the first time I heard someone articulating the use of blockchain not to build communities, but to fund and restore agency for people and communities. And I love that idea because it resonated with me, because that's what I would hope Web3 tools will be able to do, to give people back their voice, to help them understand that we have freedoms of choice and that we can speak our choices without fear of aggression or attack, and that in doing so, we might be able to come to better collective decisions. So, look, I suggested you because I was just so inspired, and I was so thankful for that talk, and I'd love to know just a little bit more how it works, because it's great to be inspired and like, well, this is what I want to do. But this conversation today, I hope I may learn a little bit more about how that's actually working. Thank you so much for your time and your inspiration. It's really cool to have you here. Thanks.
Thanks so much, Renee. It feels so great whenever like the things that I'm talking about like resonate with someone, like they understand what I'm saying at a deep level, and they're like, oh, that, I want to hear more about that. I want to do more of that. So that, like, it's really the best possible feeling. So I really appreciate that. Thanks to the Kernel team for making this whole thing happen. Kernel, again, is a very special thing to me. To me, it kind of condenses all the most special parts of being part of consensus in the early days, and kind of allows other people to experience it. In particular, like sitting down, chatting with people, trying to like think with people about like these new kinds of token systems was one of my favorite parts of consensus, and seeing you all be able to do that same thing here is great. I hope you enjoy it. So I guess I'll kick it off with kind of an overview of the way Panvalas Economics work. I'm just going to talk through it, no visuals, no slides or anything. And then we can dive into questions to kind of probe deeper, because I'm sure you're going to have more questions about how the whole thing works. So at its core, Panvalas Economics, one portion of Panvalas Economics are heavily patterned on Bitcoin's economics. So literally the idea that you could bootstrap a network of miners who are supporting this Bitcoin network by paying them with the token of the system itself, actually produced this giant industry of Bitcoin miners. Like that achievement in itself is like mind blowing. Like if you actually think about the scale of mining operations today, and think about the fact that like literally somebody just made up the payment for like how you get rewarded for mining. Like somebody just made that up and said, let's try this and see if it works. And then people kind of willed it into existence by saying, I want to be part of this Bitcoin network. I want to hold on to Bitcoin. I think this Bitcoin has value. That's what actually created this. That's what summoned this mining industry. So I think you can do that same thing for things that aren't mining. So literally just trying to replicate Bitcoin's phenomenon, not just as a digital gold necessarily, but thinking of the mining operations. Replicate Bitcoin's mining operations, but for arbitrary economic activity. So Bitcoin rewards miners. What if we wanted to create a currency that rewards people for doing whatever it is we want them to do? That's kind of the first principle behind Panvalas Economics. Take Bitcoin's economic model, and instead of pointing the rewards at miners, at people who are running massive computing operations, point the rewards at whoever it is that's doing what the various communities that are part of Panvala want to see. So I think even without any other economic explanations that I'm actually going to get into, I think without that, you can actually replicate a lot of Bitcoin's phenomenon. Like the people who see what's coming out of the system, see the thriving communities that are able to be funded by the system, and decide that they want to be a part of it by holding on to the token. Like I think that is enough to actually replicate this if you get the idea into enough people's heads in ways that they can understand, you market it well, etc. Like I think that is actually enough to kickstart this new economic phenomenon of funding communities from a currency that was made up, just like Bitcoin funded miners from a currency that was made up. I think that is straightforward and possible. The caveat here, the big giant caveat, is I think a lot of what we see that works right now in the crypto world works because we're in the middle of the largest speculative bubble that mankind has ever seen. So there are things that seem like they have a life of their own, seem like they can continue going on indefinitely, but actually cannot. They're just like the bubble, to the extent that it's a bubble, I think it will continue growing for quite some time. But I think at some point the bubble is going to stop growing. And then that's when we're going to see a lot of the things that look like they work right now actually not work. In particular, one thing that is kind of, to me, obviously not sustainable is that a lot of the value in different DeFi systems is built off of the demand for margin lending. And that is the demand to borrow dollars or borrow stable currency to buy more Ether or to buy more of any other speculative token. Like as long as the bubble continues, that's actually a decent bet for some people to make. So they're borrowing more money to buy more crypto, and that's actually working out for them. But I don't think that can work forever. Like at some point, the growth of the crypto assets, I think, will taper off and be more reasonable than it's been recently. So there's some things that have staying power that won't always play out that way. So that's why Panvala isn't just a bet on the Bitcoin model. Again, I don't think the Bitcoin model is bad. I think it works. I think it might continue working for quite some time. I think gold in particular is kind of a specifically interesting use case because some economists refer to like currencies as the bubble that never pops. Like if you get enough people to believe that Bitcoin is digital gold, like I think you can actually have a bubble that doesn't pop because its justification is just that this is a scarce asset. Like it's not making any other promises the way that different protocols, different tokens do. It's not saying we're going to accomplish this, we're going to accomplish that. It's just saying it's limited. That's all Bitcoin is. So I think that one can actually work for a long time, but not everybody can just do a Bitcoin. So while it's very heavily modeled on that Bitcoin model, and we think that it can work based just on that, that's not all we're betting on. So that gets into the other kind of model that you can think of for Panvalas token economics. So that's where the staking comes in particular. So in Panvala, when it comes time to distribute these rewards if you're thinking in Bitcoin terms. But when it comes time to distribute the inflation, when it comes time to distribute our endowment, the way that we allocate it is based on how much each community or their individual members, how much of Panvala they own. So that's what the staking is. It's you holding on to some Pan tokens and saying, I want my holdings of Pan to benefit this particular community. So in that sense, when you hold Pan, you're getting the ability to steer some of Panvala's inflation towards your community rather than it going to another community instead. So it's not just you're holding Pan because you think it's a scarce thing like Bitcoin, although it is a scarce thing like Bitcoin. You're holding it because it also gives you the ability to do something. You're holding it because you want to steer Panvala's inflation towards your community. So that is a actual it's kind of out of fashion to say utility for a token, but like in Panvala, like the reason that you want to hold on to it and use it isn't just because it's scarce. You want to hold it because it does something. It steers resources towards your community. That's the whole point of holding it. So as long as there's inflation coming out of the system, there's a reason to hold on to Pan and drive it towards your community. And we think people are going to want to hold the token for that reason. But like in Bitcoin, the inflation of Pan is capped off. So in Bitcoin, you know there's going to be 21 million Bitcoins, and there's not 21 million yet. And every 4 years, the rate at which they're issuing new Bitcoins cuts in half. So you know that there's going to be some mining rewards, but they're going to get less and less as time goes on. And in Bitcoin, they're eventually going to go to zero. So Panvala is that same sort of model. Every 4 years, the amount that's coming out of Panvala cuts in half. And eventually it's going to cap off at 100 million tokens. So
hey,
this,
Niran, I'm sorry to interrupt. I'm just going to share my screen. We made this little Figma board, which I think maybe half the folks on the call are in, but just to like put something up that zoom in on some of the charts that illustrate what you're talking about. I'm going to put that up now. And if you want to get into it yourself, you're welcome to. Otherwise, I'm going to see if I can kind of illustrate a couple of your points with what we've got on this Figma board, and I'll hand it back to you.
Sounds good. We'll see that. I'll get back into it once it's up there. Let's see. All right, so you can see some of the inflation charts in the middle of the screen there, where it's basically the inflation there's more tokens coming out, but it's tapering off. So it eventually gets lower and lower until it hits that maximum of 100 million. That's what we're talking about. On that first graph on the left, where you see that orange line, where it's gradually decreasing, that's the inflation rate. So the inflation rate gradually decreases until it ends up being zero. So it's similar to Bitcoin in that way, but this is another place where it diverges from Bitcoin. We don't ever want to run out of resources to distribute to communities. That's not the point of Panvala. We're trying to distribute resources to communities in perpetuity. We want to do it forever. Like, we think that's totally possible. So if we want to do that, we can't have a model that just runs out of resources. There has to be a way for resources to go back in. So in Bitcoin, there's no way to put Bitcoins back into the system. That's just not a thing that it does. But in Panvala, there is. You put Pan tokens back into the token supply, and then those are influenced by that same logic, that same inflation rate. New tokens, new Pan tokens that go back into the token supply are gradually released over time at a half-life of 4 years, just like the tokens we already put in there. So while there's tokens coming out, there's also tokens coming back in. And if we build up the flow of tokens coming back in, we can get to a point where for every token coming out to reward communities with, for them to be able to do whatever they want to do, there's tokens coming back in to be able to keep that cycle going forever. So when we reach that point, it's no longer that the inflation is increasing, it's that we've gotten to a stable point. And that's what that wavy red line is on that middle graph, where like there's this fluctuating flow of tokens coming back into the system, but it's no longer inflating anymore. It's reached this kind of stable equilibrium where we're doing enough, where we've convinced enough people to put tokens back into the system that the inflation has stopped, even though there's more tokens left to give out. So
and Niran, that's I think such an important, beautiful point, illustrating like steady state for this over, a decade to 2 decade to 5 decade long time horizon. Can you talk about who is putting tokens back in and why they're doing that? What is their motivation?
Yes, absolutely. So to understand like who's putting tokens back into the system, I want to first kind of like get you to temporarily forget the token. Forget about the token at all, and think about the people and the communities involved in Panvala. Because when you think about what the Pan token is and what all this hand wavy economics that I'm talking about is, all we're doing here is trying to bootstrap something that has nothing to do with the token. What we're trying to bootstrap is a network of as many communities as possible who are cooperating with one another. And they're cooperating with one another to get as many resources flowing into their community as possible. This style of organization could have always existed. There could have always been a network of communities that are working together to collectively fund what needs to get funded. They're doing all the work to say, hey, this company should fund us in this way. This company should fund us in this way. That organization could have existed. It's just very hard to get communities to agree to work with one another, especially when your starting point is, hey, we promise that at some point this will benefit your community in some way. Because if you don't have the bootstrapping mechanism of a token, all you have is promises. You can say, for the first communities that are joining, you can say, hey, join, and eventually it's going to work out. But if you have a token, you can say, join, and here are the resources for your community today. That is the biggest opportunity that blockchain technology provides for us, the ability to bootstrap things that could not have been bootstrapped before. So that's what Panvalas token is for. So thinking about what we're building, we're trying to get as many communities to work together as possible. And the resources that they're trying to capture for their communities are basically any value that you and I create in our economy. We believe that if as many communities cooperated as possible, they could redirect that value from the people who are capturing it today to your own community. So for a couple of examples of what that looks like, anytime you're being advertised to, somebody is selling your attention to somebody else. Somebody is getting paid for value that you're creating, and none of that value goes to you in any form. You can think of maybe whatever you're watching as the value that's going to you, but there's a lot more value there that you're not capturing. So that's one type of thing where you are the value, and that can be redirected to a different place. I think it should go to your community. When you think about the value of land in cities, there's somebody who's holding on to a piece of land, and whether or not they build anything on that piece of land, the more people who want to be in that area, the more productive those people are, the more that piece of land is going to be worth because it's near all those people. It's near you and me, and we want to use it. So that's what makes the value of the land go up. It's not anything that the owner did, although the owner might build a building on it, and they should be rewarded for that, but that's separate from the value that's actually coming from the land itself. The value in the land itself comes from you and me. And that's something that I think we could redirect to our communities instead of having it captured by somebody in between. When you think of things like massively multiplayer online games, a lot of what the companies are selling is the fact that the games have a lot of players. And the players are the ones who are showing up to play the game. They're providing a lot of that value, and they currently don't get a lot. So there's so many different ways in our economy, whether it's advertising, whether it's the tech giants, whether it's land in our cities, whether it's just whatever it is that gains value from you and I being there, for being part of what's going on there, that's value that could be going somewhere else. But to actually move it, to move that value to where we want it to go, that takes a lot of negotiating power. That takes as many people working together as possible. It takes something similar to a union, but not about labor, not like adversarial against employers. It's nothing like that. It's literally just saying, get as many people to work together as possible. And then you have an alternative. You can say, hey, if this company is willing to fund our communities, we're all collectively going to patronize that company. And if they don't, we're all going to collectively not patronize that company. We all have the ability to decide where we're going to make the things that where the value comes from us. We can always move it somewhere else by just saying we're not going to do that. So if it's advertising, we can say, hey, we're just not going to look at those ads anymore. We're not going to watch that program. We're not going to go to that website because we're all collectively going to say, hey, if we actually do this, if we're disciplined enough to make this shift happen, then that value can go to our communities instead. And that's a pretty big incentive to take whatever action is necessary to actually use your negotiating power well. If you could fund your whole community just by the choices you make in our economy, I think people are going to be much more disciplined about the choices that they make. But it's also much easier to do that than you might think. Because at the toy example of saying, hey, we're not going to shop here, we're going to shop here, that's a toy example. The way that I think it's going to work out in real life is that you're going to open up an app, and in that app, it's going to show you all these offers from different companies to fund your community at different rates, depending on what you buy from them. So instead of saying, I'm not going to shop here or I'm going to shop there, you're just going to say, hey, I'm going to go to the place that offers the most funding for my community. And for the, you might not even go to the place that offers the most to your community because it doesn't offer the best product. It's really just offers that you get to select. Just having that ability to coordinate on that level and produce that menu of offers for funding for your community is what lets you make granular choices in your day-to-day life that slowly and slowly build up more and more leverage and drive more and more value to your community. So I think in practice, it's going to be pretty easy. The hard part, the easy for individual people who are participating in this sort of network to drive that value to where they want to go. The hard part is actually getting all those communities together in the first place and organizing them. And that's really what this token is for. That's what we're trying to bootstrap by using the inflation of the system to fund communities today and getting as many communities together as possible. So eventually it doesn't have to be the token supply. It doesn't have to be the inflation funding the communities. It's those different sponsors, large individual donors, whatever sources of value we're able to identify and saying, hey, if you put that value back into this system, then we don't have to fund it from the inflation anymore. We fund it from what the businesses are providing. So that's kind of the story about how that loop gets closed. That's how we reach equilibrium. It's by actually collectively providing the value for businesses that they're getting from tech giants, that they're getting from advertising firms, that they're getting from whoever they're paying today as a cost of doing business to get you to come in the door. They should fund your community as a cost of doing business.
Amazing. Thank you. Thank you. Such a great answer. And I'd be open to opening the floor for questions. I think, Renee, you may have written this question, and I think it's just like exactly where Niran is right now. So I'll ask it, and Renee, maybe you can clarify if I'm off. The question was, in the fireside, you spoke about the incentive to give, and in quotes it says, people compete with each other to give as much as they can. I'm not sure if, Renee, you're the one who put this question in, but Niran, my sense is what you just described is just that, right? This competition to give. I'm not sure if anyone wants to kind of react to that. Maybe anyone other than Niran first, and then if not, I would love to hear from you, of course.
I did ask that question, and it kind of, that was the quote to which I have questions after, because I guess where I've misunderstood here is that I actually thought the donations were coming back in from the communities as opposed from outside. Like I thought there's a circle here where the communities are funding projects and then somehow they are also trying to get people to put back in to the community. I thought that was kind of that was kind of the circle I was operating in on my mind. So when I thought about this, people competing to give as much as they can, I was like, well, then doesn't that privilege just the people with the time or the money that can give? So I think I may have misunderstood who was doing the donating.
So to clarify on that piece, that's actually the loop that we've been doing so far, because we do want to illustrate to everyone involved in Panvala that there is a concept of value going back into the system. So for the past several quarters, ever since the Panvala League was initiated like a year and a half ago, the donations that each community collects in Pan, those actually have been going back into the token supply. Every token that's donated on Gitcoin Grant and Pan, that's kind of, we determine kind of the net inflation based on that. So it's not that your donation goes directly back into Panvalas token supply, it goes directly to your community. But collectively, when we decide how much of the inflation that we're going to give out, we take the portion that's equal to the number of tokens donated to each community, and we put it back into the token supply. So that's been the toy loop that we've been doing so far. But that's not the actual loop. That's just kind of a demonstration that, hey, we want to think in terms of closed loops. But the closed loop that we're aiming for is not for the individual community members to be putting tokens back into the token supply, because it doesn't really make sense for them to do that. Like, they want to fund their own community. If you're putting it back into the token supply, that's something that's going to be distributed between all the communities. So that's the part where it really depends on growing the network power. It's the things that go into Panvalas token supply should always be things that communities can't get on their own, but can get in cooperation with as many communities as possible. So when I described that menu that you're looking at in an app on your phone, where it's saying, hey, here are all the different businesses that you might want to shop at, and here are all the different rates at which they'll fund your community, that's something that an individual community can't do on their own. So anytime you're earning funding for your community through that process, that's what the company is going to be putting back into Panvalas token supply, and it will be distributed back to you collectively as a result of what the communities govern together. They're going to determine, hey, maybe for every dollar donation that you earn from a company, like, you're getting 75 cents of it to your community and 25% for the network to continue to grow itself. So anything going back into the token supply is collectively governed. Anything that your community can do on its own, you're probably going to want to give directly to your community, where it's easier to get things done because it's not collectively governed. Collective governance is a cost, but for the things that we can't do on our own, that's where collective governance is totally appropriate. So that's the real loop there. It's not necessarily about people donating their own money back into Panvalas token supply. It's about seeing what we can get as a result of our collective strength, the value of the ads that we look at, the value of the data that everybody's collecting to figure out our shopping habits, the value of just us being around a piece of land, like all that kind of stuff is things that we can collectively get access to. But as one community, as 10 communities, it's much harder to do.
I just moved the Figma over to this diagram here that I know is wrong because I made it and I got stuck at one point just trying to follow I was trying to illustrate, this is before we got on the call, the other day I just was reading your docs and I was like, okay, how does this work? And at some point I got but I don't know if I got 2/3 of the way there or what, but I sort of lost the thread. And so I thought that if we're talking through the sort of the narrative of a token, maybe it might be too much to actually edit this thing live on the call, but if we could just sort of follow a token through the system, maybe some of what you just described, Niran, would be a little bit easier to sort of visualize. And if this diagram is just way too far off of what is actually happening, we don't have to use this as a starting point. But I'm trying to help myself and other folks on the call, translate the narrative into a little bit of a system that we could look at and visually.
So let's see what we can do here. So if we want to start in this diagram at the Pan treasury and kind of work our way up, that part looks accurate. The Pan treasury is kind of the locked up token supply on chain. Again, from that, it's not a governance process to decide how much is released. It's kind of an automated process like Bitcoin. It's just how much comes out. That's how much we spend. So that's where that Pan inflation comes from. The smart contract decides how much to release every quarter, and that gets released. So once that's released, that's what's going to the individual, to the Panvala League to distribute. So that's that arrow coming off to the right, where the pan is going to the Panvala League to distribute among the communities. There's 67 communities today. So the dollar part here might not be necessarily accurate, but the pan is going directly into the Panvala League's multi-sig wallet, where it then gets distributed between the communities. So when those communities have a cost that's related to their community life, they want to be able to fund food and drink for an event. They want to pay for an event venue. They want to buy T-shirts or mugs with their community branding on it. They want to do something that brings their community together. They then spend that pan to do that. So that's where the dollars come in. So when you're spending your pan, either you're giving it directly to somebody who wants to earn in pan, which there are people who do that today, or you're just swapping it out on Uniswap. And then you're using the dollars that you get from that to be able to fund what you're doing with your community.
Thanks. The dollars that may not have made sense here, I thought I'd read somewhere that part of the amount of pan that you get from the pan inflation is really related to how much pan is staked sort of on behalf of your organization, but is also related to like matching donations that your organization raises. Is that right? Or is that, did I misremember that?
That's absolutely true. The easiest way to think about it is that the pan is just based on how much your community has staked, because the donations do something different. Donations don't actually earn you more pan. Donations increase the amount of Panvala's endowment that you can earn, because each community has a cap. So it's not just about going out and staking as much pan as possible, because like your community will be limited by the size of your community. How many people are in it? How much do they give? How many people show up to your your biggest recurring event? Like we use the size of your community to limit how much you can stake. So that's where the donated value comes in. The donated value is what we use to give your community that cap. So without any donations, you can't stake anything. You're not going to earn anything for your community if you don't have any donations. But if you do have some, that's when you're allowed to stake more.
Cool, that makes sense. And that's what these guys over here are about, right? They're sort of explaining that if you don't have enough donations, then you can't stake that much.
Exactly that.
It's a stack of coins in the beaker of water. Got it.
Mm-hmm.
We can go back to questions if this is a little too confusing to try to edit this diagram live. But this is like I said, this is sort of an evolving format, and I think it goes. I think we're looking. Part of what we're doing is we're trying to have these sessions is figure out a way for these study groups to go beyond the conversation and we may do a RAM party with the Token Engineering Commons folks soon, just to like see sort of a version of their thing demonstrated live. So this was sort of in the spirit of can we, is there a way to visualize it? Does anybody else want to? I know Andy just joined. I don't know if Andy has any questions that you'd like to prompt Niran with, or we also have right side of Figma that are the kernel syllabus as well as our own curiosity.
I did have a question just about sort of the incentives for donors. I think that's one place where I'm feeling a little dense around like how the kind of money is flowing back into the system. And I realize this is kind of sketching out a new model, but I'm trying to think of like analogs in today's world just to sort of like articulate like what's the incentive for the donors to, or I guess like what's the incentive and maybe like what are some of the ideas you have around like the mechanisms for donors to put the money back into the system? Like the thing that I'm going to is like an Amazon Smile. Like is it going to these companies and saying, hey, like, do you agree to donate some percentage? And rather than like having to organize all of those partnerships one off, they get to just do it with Panvala and have it's almost like the aggregation play. But does that make sense? I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit about sort of like the incentives and the mechanisms for the donors a little bit more.
Absolutely. So that last part that you talked about, like whether it's the aggregation play, it is literally the aggregation play. Like that, when it comes to things in crypto in general, most of them are about trying to build network effects in places where it was hard to build network effects before. So really the user experience that we want at the end of the day is that whenever you interact in our economy, whenever you shop anywhere, whenever you provide value for someone, even in ways that are currently passive, that don't look like transactions, whenever anything like that is happening, you are receiving a voucher. And that voucher lets you take a value to any community you're a part of that's part of Panvala. So that's the thing that's hard today. When you go on Amazon Smile, like you can take the money to anything that's on Amazon Smile. What we want is for it to not just be Amazon, and to not just be the communities that are partnered with Amazon Smile. So we want it to be every actor in the economy offering these vouchers, and then allowing you to take it to any community in our society. So that's really the network that we're trying to build up at the end of the day. When it comes to the incentives for donors to donate, there's two kinds of people making contributions when it comes to Panvala. One is the individual community members, and when they donate, there's nothing really changed from the way that they donate today. Either you're donating because you support the thing and you just want to donate. Maybe you're paying your membership due, so the community has decided that this is what everybody needs to contribute, so you're making your contribution as is expected by your community. Whatever it is, that stays mostly the same. The big difference is that you also have another option to support your community, which is staking. So you can stake Pan, and rather than just having to contribute however you were normally contributing, you get to contribute additionally from Panvala's inflation, which is something that you didn't have access to before until you staked. So that's really the donor, the community member view of contributing to a community within Panvala. The other contributions come from people who aren't part of the community. They come from corporations, they come from businesses, they come from people who want your attention or want your business. So right now, all that money flows to tech giants, flows to advertising firms, flows to various middlemen in our economy who happen to have gotten us all to say, hey, we're gonna show up no matter what. So you can sell our attention to whoever you want. And we're just going to not do that anymore. Instead of saying we're going to show no matter what, we're going to say we're going to show up based on how much you're funding our business. So instead of those middlemen being able to capture all of that value, we're going to be able to direct a significant portion of it back to our own communities. So the reason that those companies are going to donate to fund your community is literally the same reason they pay Google and Facebook today. There's tons of companies out there. They're already paying Google and Facebook tons of money to the extent that they are some of the most profitable companies that have ever existed on Earth. So they're already paying this money. We don't want to change the amount of money that they're paying necessarily. In fact, when I say Google, my phone responds because it's everywhere. So anyway, it's not that we're trying to change the amount of money that's being spent. It's that as a cost of doing business, instead of paying Google and Facebook as just a requirement to sell your goods and services, instead of doing that, you're going to fund communities as a requirement to sell your goods and services. So that's what's going to get people to come in the door. So that doesn't mean that it happens automatically. We, as the network of communities, have to build up the infrastructure to be able to follow through on that promise. Like when you fund a community, you need to get business. Like if that's not happening, then they're not going to do it. So that's the infrastructure that we have to build up collectively to be able to say, okay, we need to spread the information far and wide about how you get these vouchers to fund your community. Make sure everybody knows that they should go shop at those businesses, and kind of close that loop and make it just as valuable to those businesses as paying Google and Facebook is today. So that's the incentive for those businesses to donate. They're just reallocating their marketing budget to be more effective. We're going to make traditional ways of spending your marketing budget less effective than they are today, because we're going to decide we're not going to shop at places based on what's advertised to me. We're going to shop based on what's funding our community. So spending your money in that way is going to be less effective. And then we're going to make funding communities more effective by organizing ourselves and building up the muscle to be able to actually provide value for businesses that are funding our communities.
Got it. Thank you so much.
There's one last economic analogy I want to put out there. So the first thing that I compared Panvala to was Bitcoin and how we're going to build up this way to fund communities the same way Bitcoin built up a way to fund Bitcoin mining. So that's one way to think about it. The second thing that I talked about was building up this network of communities that are getting funded because they can collectively organize to get resources from companies and businesses in our economy. So the last thing that I want you to think about is when it comes to staking, staking in Panvala is a lot like American-style sports leagues. So if you're not familiar with how American-style sports leagues work, it's really a system where you buy in to be able to own the sports team. So like when the NBA wants to expand, they're adding teams, there's some rich guy who's like, I would really like to have a sports team, and I'm going to pay the existing teams in the league for the right to add a team to the league. So that's how the teams expand. It's not about competing your way up, it's about buying your way in. That's how we do things in America. It's great. So the way to think about staking is that as we grow the network, there's more of a reason to want to be part of it. Just like as you grow the sports league, like when the soccer league in America was getting off the ground, the buying a new franchise was much cheaper than buying an NBA franchise or an NFL franchise because the league wasn't that big. And now the most recent franchise to join, which happens to be the Austin soccer team here in the city that I live, they spent a large sum to become part of it because the league has grown since then. But you're buying into this network of cooperation when you buy into a sports league. These are the teams that are going to hold games with you. You're going to collectively grow the sport to advertise it, to get people to watch. Like you're buying into a system of cooperation when you buy into a sports league. And your benefits are based on how much of the league you own. In the sports leagues, it's all equal ownership mostly. So one team is equal to any other in terms of what you bought in. In Panvala, it's just like however much pan you own is your community's share of this system of cooperation. But that's really what's happening here. Like when the network of communities is small, the benefits are probably significantly smaller. So the value that's available should be lower, and the people willing to pay less to join in and be part of it. But as the network grows, and it's like, hey, my community can access all this funding from all these different companies that want to offer it to me, like that's when it becomes, there's more and more demand for that PAN token. There's more and more value available to the communities, and that's when it grows over time. So that's really a metaphor to use when you're thinking about like, okay, we're trying to grow this network of communities that isn't like a network of traditional communities. Like there have been networks of communities before, networks of unions, networks of nonprofits, et cetera. But what they all lacked was the ownership piece. So if you have a network of communities with an ownership piece, that looks a lot like an American-style sports league. So that's the other metaphor that I want to put out there.
And Niran, just to clarify, the ownership piece is that piece of the staked PAN that is associated with your particular Panvala League organization.
Exactly that. Allocating benefits according to a community's ownership or their community members' ownership of the network is the key piece that I think makes creating this kind of network so feasible today in a way that it wasn't in the past. That the ownership piece is what allows the network to grow. It makes it, even though this kind of network could have always been organized, if we had the ability, the organizing energy, the capacity to make it happen, like there's no, the blockchain technology does not make anything that I've described possible. It was all possible before. What blockchain technology makes possible is growing this. It makes it easier to get new communities on board because you have something to offer them today. And people who think that the network will grow and think that more people will want PAN have a reason to buy into it as well. So that's the new thing that didn't exist in previous styles of organizing. Bringing property style thinking to community organizing is brand new. And there's so much opportunity there to be able to organize things that we think should have been possible before, but seem to be really hard to get off the ground. they're now much easier to get off the ground because you can put property into your community organization.
Thank you.
Hey, Niran. It's another question about the token economics, which I think are wonderful, but perhaps you'd speak just a little bit more about what you think the meaning of ownership is shifting towards, given this particular description, especially as it relates to property, right? Traditionally, ownership would mean exclusive rights, possession, or control, but that's not really the case in these kinds of network. And I wonder what you think ownership means these days, if not exclusive rights.
I love that question. I love all your questions because you give me the opportunity to talk about things that have been in my head that I never have the context to talk with anybody else about. So thank you. So if there's ownership in themes like Panvala or themes that aren't Panvala but are part of this wave, the shift in our society, but it's not the traditional type of ownership, what does it mean? So in traditional types of property, what you're buying is effectively a flow of future proceeds, a flow of future revenue from other people wanting to access that property. Like if you own a piece of land, what you're buying when you buy that piece of land is either the right to use it yourself or the right to rent it out to somebody else. So you're buying the ability to collect rent on that land. If you're buying a piece of a company, you're buying a share of the company's future profits. So that's traditional property. You're like the value that's flowing through it, some of it's going to go to you. If we're trying to not do that, so I'm not saying that profit is bad or that profit should go away. I think profit is still going to exist and it's going to be in a lot of places. The only place where I think profit is going to go away is when the value comes from me and you. Profit that comes from the work of people and the work of businesses is going to keep happening and it's going to be great. But profit that comes from me and you, that's what's going to get redirected. And it's not going to get redirected to the holders of a token because that would be traditional property and that would just not accomplish anything. That's just saying we're just going to change who the rentiers are. And that's not really the idea. But what we can do instead is say, okay, this property, when you own PAN tokens, it doesn't give you the right to any of the value flowing through the system. It gives you the ability to direct it to your own community. So what does that mean on a scale where this network has grown and succeeded? If you holding PAN allows you to direct value to a community you choose, what holding PAN gives you is basically a kind of maybe a leadership right. And not like a exclusive leadership right, but kind of like people are going to seek you out to participate in their community because you hold PAN. And you are probably going to have more influence in that community because if you leave that community and you take your PAN with you to another community, then they're going to have less resources to be able to allocate because they don't have enough PAN anymore. So that's what Panvala style property I think ends up being. It ends up being like you can't, like if everybody is earning these vouchers, they can take them to whichever community they want, as long as that community has enough PAN to be able to get that share of Panvala's resources. So there are going to be people who are competing for these different token holders to support their community, and they're going to offer different things to these token holders as a result. They can't offer them money. That's kind of the one restriction, because again, that turns that back into normal property. But they can offer them status. They can say, hey, look, we're going to put this person's name on buildings because in our community, we like this person. They support our community with this PAN that gives us this endowment to do so much stuff with. They find different ways to honor these people that hold the PAN. Maybe the PAN holders are leading the community because they started their own community. They had the PAN to do it. Maybe they're not leading the community, but they're just getting different forms of status for being able to do it. As long as it's not money, it's going to be totally okay. But I think what it looks like is something like that. PAN is kind of a community leadership right, a community status right. But it doesn't give you control over the flow of money, because the vouchers at the end of the day that people are choosing which community to allocate it to, that's what determines where the money goes. They're just limited by the amount of PAN that each community has.
Amazing. Thank you so much. It's such a joy to see you, as always. There are a few other questions in the chat, perhaps one from Daryl in particular, that it might be worth touching on. Oh, and Rich. Niran, Daryl is kind of asking about city coins and ATX DAO, and I wonder if you've thought about these kinds of more localized uses of token, particularly in the context of what Vitalik has maybe been speaking about with crypto cities. And Rich is asking if you have any NFT support built into or planned for communities in Panvala.
Yeah, so for Daryl's question on city coins and ATX DAO, so again, I live in Austin, and I'm really excited about getting city coins and ATX DAO into the Panvala League. We're actually throwing a party here in Austin, a happy hour in about 2 weeks that Panvala is sponsoring, and that's really going to be kind of the place where I make the biggest push for it, because it's like, hey, you want more funding for events like this? This is what Panvala does. Tap into this network of communities who are making this happen. So the wheels are in motion on that one, and all the different city coins that start. Like if you have contacts with them and you want to help get them involved with Panvala, we want to help you make that happen. So definitely really excited about city coins. At the end of the day, I think community life thrives locally. I think community life thrives face to face with people you care about because you see them all the time because they're in the same city as you. So there's a lot that we can do remotely and online. You can have good communities online, but it's so much easier to have thriving communities in person. And I think most of the communities that get created using this kind of technology, I think they're going to be mostly people who meet face to face. On the NFT support that Rich is asking about, he's asking, is there any NFT support in Panvala or planned for Panvala? Does Tokenomics integrate with any of the current NFT platforms? So currently, there's no connection. We are closely involved with the Doing Good team, and they're building an NFT platform where giving is kind of baked into each transaction on the platform. So being able to tie that into Panvala, I think, could have lots of benefits. If your community is buying lots of NFTs, maybe that gives you access to more funding from Panvala just because of that. Not because of any other like direct donation, not because of a membership due, but you just have a community that loves buying NFTs and they buy it on Doing Good, where a fraction of their purchase is funding their community. We can add on to that funding using that as kind of your proof of community. Like if you're a community of art buyers, then and you're using a platform with donations built in, then you have a proof of community that other communities don't. And that proof of community is really like, how many people are part of your community? Are they willing to sacrifice something? If they're not willing to sacrifice something, are they willing to show up? That's how we measure the size of each community and determine how much of Panvala they can access. So communities that are heavy users of Doing Good to buy their NFTs are going to have that proof of community built in on day one.
So much alignment. Thank you, Niran. Wow. Okay. I think there's still questions coming in. Michael, I want to leave it to you to get a sense of how you're feeling on Wrapup, if there's anything.
I think if there are any other like big burning questions that folks have, I know that Vienna just posted one. We could make Vienna's question the last question, unless there's anything that any other channel that I'm not tracking. I think this has been great, Niran. Thank you so much for being here and spending this time with us and going a little bit deeper into the very, very interesting and inspiring protocol that you run. Vienna, do you want to take the last one, or Renee, do you have any, since you kicked us off, do you have any last questions?
I'm interested in Vienna's question.
That's perfect. Let's do it. Vienna, do you want to unmute and ask it?
Sure, Niran. I guess when I think about community, I often think about, how do we get, how do we synchronize things that are happening in real life, like in the party that you're putting together. And of course, I think about impact as well, especially like climate impact. But I'm just curious about what your plans are.
Yeah, so when it comes to verifying the contributions from each community, so far it has been easy because we've been relying on donations of Pan as that proof of community. So like we just look at the blockchain and we're like, were these donations made to the wallet that the community controls? Cool, that's proof of community. We're set, and we'll allocate you a portion to be able to stake for your community. So moving forward, we're actually going to loosen that constraint because we do want to account for communities that are organizing in real life that aren't collecting contributions on the blockchain. They still have proof of community, it's just in a different form. So we want to account for any kind of proof of community there is. If your community is donating in like cash, we want to count that. If your community is donating using like Stripe or some sort of platform, we want to count that. So for future quarters, we're literally just going to ask communities how much they get from their community members. So the reason it's easy for us to loosen this constraint is because the economics of Panvala do not actually depend on the donations of Pan. The donations of Pan are, you can think of them as really a marketing mechanism. When there's Pan flowing around, when people are talking about like donate with Pan, it gets the word out about what we're doing. So it's valuable to us, and we're probably going to give communities a bonus for doing that, but it's not core to Panvalas Economics. What's core to Panvalas Economics is the staking. We do want communities to stake. So if your community tells us that you have all this proof of community and you don't actually stake to use it, that's not a negative impact on us. If your community says we have all this proof of community and you actually stake for it, that's what makes it. That's when we would probably like check in to make sure that your community is actually like large enough to earn that portion. So it's kind of like a trust but verify sort of thing. Like ask the communities like, what are you getting? Like what do your community members contribute to your community? And to as long as it's not causing problems, just trust them. When it makes Panvala harder to share because some communities aren't earning a whole bunch, verify that those communities are actually collecting what they say they're collecting. So that's the general idea there. We can support any kind of, if you think of Panvala less as a crypto decentralized technology system and more of like that social organization of communities cooperating that could have existed before, but can exist now because we can grow it using tokens, then we can really use any kind of data we want to be able to verify that communities are fitting in the way that we think they should, that we're allocating the resources the way they think they should be allocated, because it's just people interacting with each other. It's just communities interacting with each other. And we use the blockchain, we use tokens on the blockchain to help grow that system.
Right, and if I'm getting you right, it's like basically you're counting on the network effects to counter maybe Sybil attacks, basically.
So really counting on the need for people to stake to counter Sybil attacks. So if you say your community is huge and then you buy a whole bunch of Pan to stake, you're actually not hurting the network that much. Like we do want to cap what each community can stake to make it easy to share. But like if you lie and say your community is huge and then you buy millions of Pan to stake, like there's not that many communities within Panvala that are going to be sad because you did that. So it's really just trying to achieve that balance. There is like if you push it too much, like it gets to a point where like a single community is getting too much of the resources and everybody's not getting that much. So that we do want to make sure that those caps are fairly accurate, but it's not the end of the day if somebody fudges the numbers. So we do want to verify that they're true, but the damage that's done when somebody provides false information is low if they're actually staking.
Got it. Okay, thank you.
No problem.
Thanks, Niran. Thanks, everyone. Thanks, Vivek. Thanks, Andy. Thanks, everyone who asked questions. Thanks, Renee, for having the great idea of bringing Niran and Panvala back so that we could really get into it. I understand it much better now, and frankly, I'm a lot more interested in it and want to like go even deeper into it on my own time than I was before. So I'm glad that we're sourcing these ideas from the broader kernel community. And Niran, thanks again for your time. And everyone else, look forward to the next one next week. We'll vote on it in the next couple of days. Have a great rest of your day, evening, morning.
Thank you, Michael. Thank you, Niran. Thank you, Renee. Thank you, everybody.
Thanks for having me. Have a good one, everybody.
Thanks, man.